Cicada Innovations acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Today with us, we have Scott Taylor, CEO and co-founder of Perks Health. And I'll invite the panelists to please put their video and sound on. Kath Hamilton, CEO and co-founder of Loop Plus. Sylvia Pfeiffer, CEO and co-founder of CoView. And Elizabeth Yunako, co-founder of Spockle. So these incredible founders have generously agreed to share their stories and learnings candidly over the next hour. And of course, they're here to answer your questions about the digital health ecosystem. So we might get started with a quick intro from all of the panelists. Sylvia, did you want to kick us off with a sentence about who you are?
Sure. I'm Sylvia Pfeiffer, CEO of CoView. CoView is a telehealth company. We are servicing the private and public healthcare providers in Australia, and very happy to be here today.
Thank you. Kath, do you want to go next? You're on my screen, so I'm just going in the order.
Great. Loop Plus is a remote monitoring platform. Our first product is it enables wheelchair users to take charge of their health, basically a Fitbit for your bum.
Fantastic. Scott?
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Scott Taylor. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Perks Health. Perks uses behavioural science to help people living with chronic conditions stick to their treatment plans in an evidence-based way.
Thank you. And Elizabeth?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Elizabeth Yunako, a co-founder of Spockle. We develop a speech therapy app to support children with communication challenges.
Fabulous. Thank you all. And thanks to everyone who also volunteered a question when they registered. We've actually used these questions to form the basis of what we'll cover today. We'll be taking questions from the crowd as well, but we only have an hour, so we can't promise that we can get through all of them, but we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So please continue to use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and upvote anything that you like in terms of questions using the thumbs up. So I might throw the first question to Scott and Elizabeth, and maybe Scott can answer first and Elizabeth after. The challenges for digital health companies can be quite different to the traditional medtech companies. What's one of the bigger challenges that your company has faced in the process of commercializing your digital health solution, and what did you do to overcome that?
Sure. Elizabeth, do you want to go first?
Oh, thanks, Scott. So I guess, yes, I think that's a really great question in terms of the challenges that might be unique to digital health. So in our experience, I think there are several things. First of all, is the business model. How do you actually monetize what you're offering? And also looking at just because, well, we remember, you know, sort of 3 years ago when we started, not many people were even clear of what digital health means. So there's a lot of that education that we had to do. And I think, as you know, with healthcare, there are so many different stakeholders. So you have to really understand, you know, the funding model in different countries, the regulatory perspective and so forth. And we find that, and I'm sure that applies to all, but I think with digital health, because you are combining that healthcare, maybe a service delivery model with tech, I think that just brings in a new element when you have also different stakeholders with different expectations or understanding of what that means and how that works commercially. So that's been kind of our experience. I don't know if you had the same sort of experience, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, definitely for us was, regardless of kind of how compelling your product is, there's tends to be a lot of gatekeepers, no matter what your business model is in healthcare, whether you're going out, you know, through hospital networks or clinicians or pharmacies, or even our model being kind of, you know, B2B2C, in that we sell our programs to organizations who then give the program to their patients or their members or their kind of insured population. And I think that is the really hard thing, is that you're often not as in control of your own destiny as you'd like. You need to know, you know, kind of where funding comes from, and how those decisions are made, which just means that, comparing to a kind of a SaaS product or a consumer product or an e-commerce product, where you kind of, really can control a lot of the levers in your business. I think in digital health in particular, there can be a lot of frustration that, I'm sure, other people on this panel are definitely affected by it even more than myself, in terms of, particularly when it comes to kind of government and, and the decisions made on kind of public health level. It's super, can be super challenging.
Thank you both. Kath and Sylvia, what are the most vital steps, and this may lead back to that same question that I asked Elizabeth and Scott, that you've had to take as a digital health company? It could be regulation, it could be clinical trials or IP. Is there something that's been super vital that you're just like, it's a no, can't miss this step?
Sylvia, you go first.
So for Australia, we went through some regulatory aspects. Yes, that's actually one of the vital steps oftentimes in healthcare. But for telehealth, the regulatory aspects for us were mostly around really making sure that we respect the privacy principles and look after the patient data, because that's really, really important in healthcare. We're now preparing for a US entry, so they have much more regulatory requirements than we have here. So HIPAA compliance is one of those things that we're going through right now. Ultimately, going for ISO 27K, etc. All of these regulatory things are the biggest challenge in healthcare, and some really big ticket items to tick off on. Everything else kind of depends on that. Then obviously finding the business model, as was already discussed.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and off the back of that, I would agree we're a hardware device as well. So then all the ISOs around hardware certification and learning that as you go is very uncertain, and there's a lot of grey area. So that was a steep learning curve, and it wasn't clear. I would say the other critical factor for us, in addition to all the ones that everyone else has mentioned, is that workflow and fitting into the workflow, which I know everyone else has to do as well, making sure we are like Perks B2B2C. So making sure when your business is dependent on being recommended and prescribed by a clinician, that you're removing any friction, through that workflow, and that's why we've predominantly co-designed with the end users, including clinicians.
Fantastic, thank you. So we've got a question here from the crowd around development of your solutions, your software solutions, and whether you retained that development within your company or did you outsource it to external providers? And if you outsourced it, did you use overseas resources or Australian resources? Is anybody up for answering that one? Scott's got his mic off. Sylvia's got her mic off. Maybe both of you can take turns.
Go.
Yeah. I mean, so the thing I'd say is that we definitely kind of retain it all in-house at the moment. But our MVP of Perks, we built for about $3,000 with offshore developers, because we really just wanted to be able to put something in, a select handful of patients' hands, test their kind of, how it works for them. And that was all offshore development. We then very quickly, once we realized we had a concept, something was working, we'd got a lot of good feedback, but then actually to kind of then hire a developer and start basically building it from the ground up in-house. But I think it is one of the things that can be such a barrier to kind of, entrepreneurs I speak to of, I've just been quoted $150,000 to build the app, and it has to be, exactly how I've specified it. And that's kind of what's, the requirement. It's often easy to kind of focus on what that like gold standard solution looks like. And obviously you'll need to get there before you're operating, with the enterprises in the healthcare system. You've got to be careful about things like handling, healthcare data and privacy and security and everything else. But I think that there is a bit of a, perception that, as a result, you need to then go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in getting the kind of MVP out there. There's all sorts of ways of kind of testing your concept and really getting proper feedback from end users relatively cheaply. Now all of our development's done in-house. We've actually just gone through kind of HIPAA compliance, and as kind of Sylvia alluded to, that has a whole bunch of other burdens around things like handling data, where you even store data, where you can have patient data, where you can't, whether it's Australia or the US. And that's where you do want that kind of in-house team, kind of that and trust, and so you're not kind of sending stuff to and forth with outsourced providers. So I'd say you can definitely start, get the MVP off the ground with kind of outsourced providers, but it is much easier over time to bring that in-house.
So I'm a software engineer myself, actually both a scientist and a software engineer before I started this. So, I built the first MVP myself. Now I was doing that while working at CSIRO, so that's fortunate circumstances, all of the above. But honestly, the MVP, which I developed, built on working with a particular customer, it took less than a month to build. So I don't think spending a lot of money on your MVP is the right thing to do. Just be very, very clear what you want up front, and you will find, and maybe just find one software engineer that you can sit down with and really do it, give it some good design, etc. Just that's for market testing. You don't want to go overboard on that, because you're going to throw that away and restart afterwards to do a proper job. So as the first version was so cheap and easy to develop, what came after that was really hard, and we're still working on making that the way that I imagined it after having done the MVP. And we do everything in-house for a couple of reasons. We want to retain the IP. We want to retain full control over IP. If you outsource that to someone else, you never really know what they're going to do with that IP. I've heard horror stories of company outsourcing to China, and then that company in China coming up with a product that looks exactly the same, except it's in Chinese, and taking over the Chinese market. So you do want to be really careful about your IP, also about the things you put into contracts with them, the terms. So retain IP, build capability in-house, because people get better over time. So they're all very important. So I'm totally a believer in doing it in-house, and also that makes it a way to build the product in a way that it's maintainable, which is also really, really important.
Fabulous. Thank you both.
Could I just add just a hardware perspective as well, which is the same. So yeah, I unfortunately didn't have any engineering background, but still managed, I guess, for everyone out there who are coming from that medical or science background. So the internet is a marvelous thing, and our proof of concept was very much I built just soldering things, or just working that out, and then testing it ourselves to see that some of the hypotheses that we have were right. And then our journey from there is bringing the experts into the organization to build it. And now actually now that we're moving to be a medical device, all the ISO standards as a hardware device that we need to be, we started to try and upskill on that, but the level of effort and the significant amount of, I would say, distraction to upskill in that, we've partnered with a great company that we've been working with to help us get that next version of the medical device out there, but based on all that we've learned and all the requirements, and that's just for the hardware component, but they're very much partnered along the way. But I think to everyone else's point, because you're iterating as you go, even for hardware, as particularly as we're co-developing with our end users, you're learning and you're building up that knowledge over time. So it's absolutely critical. The IP is developing, as Sylvia says, not just in what you produce, but all of the knowledge as a business, as you're working with users that you learn over time, all goes into that product development and user needs.
Fantastic. Thank you. There are quite a few questions that had come in previously and also coming in now around adoption. So there's a few different ways we can approach it, but I guess Elizabeth, maybe we can ask you first, how difficult is it to get good adoption of your technology into an organization, even if somebody's already agreed to adopt it? And are there any strategies that you suggest companies can take to improve that likelihood of adoption?
Thank you. That's a big question, I think. In our experience, so first of all, we've had to, I guess, change the way we go to market with our product. And I think it's a journey that you keep evolving that business model. So we started with sort of more of a direct-to-consumer type model. So that has its own challenges in terms of adoption. And then I think in the last 6 months, we've sort of change direction and go to more of a B2B to C channel, like what Scott mentioned, and we work more with organizations. I find that, I guess as with any new thing, is that change management, but I think more so in a health sector, you know, I think it's about being very clear on where your solution fits into the whole treatment pathway or the clinical pathway, and being very cognizant of the different stakeholders along that pathway as well. And I think then, you know, also being able to articulate and then making sure that the right stakeholders are fully on board in terms of where you would like to go, and find that obviously around the engagement and things, you know, having to initially quite, you know, one-on-one almost on a basis to try and get your first sort of users to be kind of your advocate for others later on. So it's really important to get and if you're lucky, you can get people who are influential in that industry, and they can then become sort of a supporter of your product, you know, to their peers. I think that's a really great position. So I think it's just that really, I think having a mindset of solving a problem, so not really trying to push your product onto someone. You just got to use it this way, but it's really understanding what is really the problem you're trying to solve, and the expectation of the person using the product on the other side. I think that's...
Would you say that engagement is a relationship building sort of slow process? It takes time?
Yes, I think so. I think, and again, we've been sort of marketing our product. We started in Southeast Asia first, and then now come back to Australia. So it's very different, obviously different you have to take into consideration the cultural context, the regulatory, the local environment. So I do think it does take time, but again, it's finding your key sort of champion who can then promote your product in that. Sort of endorsing it is really worth the time and effort, I think.
Fantastic. Can anyone else talk to how they decided between a D2C versus a B2B business model?
I'm happy to. I mean, for us, yeah, it was definitely a real consideration because, yeah, obviously, you know, our end user is the patient, but we pursued a kind of B2B business model. I think the reason for that is, you know, if we think about what Perks is set up to do and what we focus on doing, it's effectively trying to kind of make sure that no patient is left behind in terms of, you know, adhering to their treatment plan. And the unfortunate reality is that, you know, that really means that, yeah, actually targeting the kind of 0 to 5% of patients who account for something like 75% of, you know, hospitalization spend. And so for us, it's actually the most disengaged, you know, probably non-health literate patients who we're actually pursuing. And so the kind of decision was then, okay, is that person then likely to pay for a solution that's improving their adherence? And the kind of answer was just basically no. And so, I mean, that's not to say we won't explore solutions that are kind of D2C in the future, but for us, it was very clear that if we were going to be targeting and trying to, you know, drive behavior change with the patients who were, I guess, most disengaged and least likely to adopt a healthcare intervention, is that we had to find a sponsor who was willing to pay for that behavior change, of which there's many. It's just often not the individual. I think that varies depending where you are in healthcare. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, where you're kind of delivering. Yeah, if you're selling direct to kind of a business, yeah, it's far more direct there. Or if you're selling a solution to someone who is highly health engaged and highly health literate, it's probably definitely a much more viable model on the D2C side. But it's really important to probably understand, you know, whether the patient you're targeting is, you know, likely to pay for, you know, additional healthcare services anyway.
Yeah, thank you. We've got another question around how you plan to grow internationally in an environment where it's quite challenging to travel, and your thoughts on US expansion in 2021 and beyond. Is anybody already working with the US? I think Sylvia was saying, or?
Yeah, I can say a couple words about that. I actually think that expanding into the US right now is probably the best time ever, because everyone's used to doing video calls. You don't actually have to travel there to sell. Everyone will be doing, whether you just take a video call on the ground from there or you take the video call from here, in the end doesn't really matter. they don't really care when you talk to them, as long as you talk to them while they're working. So they might mean getting up a little bit earlier and maybe moving the time that you're meeting with people in America. I had a meeting at 7 o'clock this morning, you know. But other than that, it actually means less travel. Because in the past, if you were trying to set up like a company in the US or sales in the US, and you're trying to meet potential customers, you had to travel. So I actually think this is probably the best time to grow into the US. And the pandemic is actually making life easier, because everyone is having to do things online.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Anybody disagree, agree?
I mean, so we launched with our first US customer at the end of last year. And that's been phenomenally successful in terms of growth through the pandemic. I'd say, and in the lead up to that, I'd probably been over to the US 4 or 5 times in the kind of following 12 months, and actually landed back in kind of the second week of March, just before borders started locking down and everything else. So I was lucky I probably didn't get stuck there. 2020 was very much supposed to be a very US focused year for us. And I probably would be over there currently, if travel bans were not as they are. For us, we definitely found the kind of initial hit of COVID. I mean, our customers tend to be, large healthcare providers or payers, and kind of March, April, May, they were more concerned about whether they had enough beds in the hospital than they were necessarily, about, our solution. But definitely found, that experience, as Sylvia said, in the last couple of months, as they've kind of come out, they kind of, whilst it's not like they're in a good place, they kind of have dealt with kind of all contingencies now and kind of know the path forward. And there's definitely a real re-engagement on kind of remote digital health solutions in more than kind of a trivial way. I think they've kind of really learned the ability to deliver care digitally is something that would be really valuable. And so a lot of those discussions now are being picked back up. And as Sylvia said, I was up at 5:30 this morning, and it made no difference, because it was 3 p.m. Central Time, or kind of logging on. And for them, I may as well have been in the same city. Definitely makes it a bit easier, even if you kind of lose a bit more sleep.
Fantastic, thank you. Kath, I might throw to you, what have been some of the most valuable support pillars available to you in the ecosystem, especially with regards to digital health? And it could be grants, funding, programs, all sorts of things.
It's definitely the network. We participated in the Cicada MedTech Accelerator, and opening up, we didn't have the exposure to the medical, device system and the regulatory requirements. So we were really very, we were meeting very much a clinical need, but how to go from a product that we were working with clinicians on, but then how to get it to market as a commercial device was very unknown to us. So the network that we established back, 18 months maybe ago, still is supporting us to this day. So same went through another terrific accelerator, remarkable, and that same network still 4 years later is still supporting us. So it's very important, to keep those networks and support. And with that, iCare, which is New South Wales insurer, was we have 2 consecutive grants from them, and they've been a terrific partner in supporting us in terms of how we both commercialize, but also support with their participants and clinicians, and then obviously having to raise funds. But really that network, it's all truly all the things that you don't know, all the unknowns that network can experience. And through one of our terrific investors, Giant Leap, connected us with Scott and Perks, those other founders who have been through this before. It's absolutely critical to understanding what some of these hurdles are. So I would say that money is essential, but as important is a network building for all of the experience.
Thank you. Anybody else had any major pillars of support that they have found really, really useful?
We've used CRCP grants and also New South Wales partnership grant. In the early days, those are really, really important, were really important to us. Also the R&D tax reimbursement actually helped us through a a really rough patch where we were having some cash flow issues. So that was actually really, really useful.
Yes.
So, you know, we're starting to see the Australian startup environment being much better set up for starting new companies. And this is particularly challenging in healthcare where things just naturally take much longer to go to market and to become a success.
Yeah, I definitely second that on the grants, and yeah, it's definitely worth looking at. There's a lot of great grants out there for healthcare companies, but also just general grants for innovation. And not surprisingly, when it comes to government grants, I think, you know, health is obviously a big priority area for the government. So, you know, healthcare companies even stand, you know, a greater chance of probably getting those more kind of general innovation grants. I think, you know, touching on kind of Sylvia's comment is that our experience is that there's a lot of great kind of health investors in Australia. And there's definitely more now than there were kind of, you know, 4 years ago, of people who really start to understand the digital health space. But it is still a reality where you kind of have, you know, investors who know the kind of real biotech, you know, device kind of research space really well, and are used to kind of those, you know, those type of kind of payoffs of, you know, a lot of R&D, a lot of, you know, sunk, yeah, funds, and then kind of that pays off over long term. And there's obviously a lot of great generalist investors who are used to kind of SaaS, consumer tech, e-commerce companies. And the unfortunate reality for digital health is that we kind of sit somewhere in between that. And what that means is that, you know, kind of you don't have necessarily the trademark, so the IP and patent protection and stuff that, you know, a hardcore biotech company might have. But you also don't necessarily have the speed to market and the growth rates and, you know, everything else that, you know, consumer tech or a SaaS platform might have. And so for us, you know, grants is a kind of really good way of, you know, getting further on the same amount of funding to help you hit those milestones that kind of really, you know, make it easy for investors to make the decision. And it's not to say there's not great investors out there who really understand the digital space, who will make an effort to kind of understand your business and how it should be valued and how, you know, what stage you're at. But definitely, I think, you know, the power of grants in helping you get a bit further, hit a few more milestones, and just make it an easier decision for investors to be like, oh, like, yeah, this is awesome. You're in healthcare, which I like as an industry, but you're also heading towards those kind of metrics that I'm inevitably going to be asked about at my investment committee meeting.
Fantastic. Elizabeth, you had your mic off. Were you going to add anything to that?
Yeah, so just maybe want to mention one thing that, especially if you know, I think companies are looking to expand globally. What has helped us is Austrate. So we've actually tapped into, instead of the R&D, we actually tapped into the EMDG grant, the Export Market Development Grant, and that's been very useful. But I think funding aside, I have found, you know, partnering with Austrate from various countries have been great in that they've given us platforms to present and sort of showcase our technology or our product, and, you know, bringing sort of Australian delegations and to be a part of that, and also help with matchmaking and connecting us with stakeholders in that country. So I think that's probably one avenue that's, you know, a lot of startups can look into, and, you know, very useful to start off with.
Fabulous, thank you. So we've got another question I'm going to throw to, which is, how important is it for digital health solutions to demonstrate real-world clinical benefits and thus reimbursements from their payers? Who's keen to take that question up?
I don't know if anyone that starts out will immediately get reimbursements for their tools. I think very, very few of us have reached that stage at this point in time. We were quite lucky with the pandemic, and suddenly Medicare just decided to put a blanket on telehealth reimbursements, which is exactly what we've been targeting. You know, we were originally created to create a universal uptake of telehealth, so that telehealth becomes a normal everyday thing for every clinician in Australia. And first we were laughed out of the door by investors who said, that's never going to happen. You should be, you know, you should be selling direct to patient and have clinicians, hire clinicians. That's what you should be doing. I said, no, we're a software solution. We're not a healthcare provider. We're a software solution for healthcare providers, which is a differentiation. But so it took us very long to get to the point where that was actually relevant, and the Medicare change then helped. getting reimbursement for a particular tool, that I think is a very long pathway. We have a tool called PhysioROMs, where we're calculating range of motion just via video analysis. That's on that pathway, but I think that'll take a very long time before we get there.
I guess it also depends what you mean by payers as well, because there's obviously both public and private payers. I agree with Sylvia that, you know, public reimbursement, short of a pandemic, making your solution absolutely critical for a period, it's going to be a long path, and you're going to struggle to probably convince investors and build a business model off some potential future reimbursement, as much as I think everyone on this call would like to see reimbursement for digital health technologies. Where we have focused in Australia and now the US is on private payers. And so they're kind of entities like health insurance, life insurance, workers' compensation insurance, who have some financial exposure to an adverse health event. And so we've definitely had success there. I mean, it's not reimbursement in the sense of we're not a service that they're paying for or a provider that they're paying for, but they do invest in digital health solutions with decent evidence that they can improve those outcomes and reduce their risk and ultimately their kind of benefits cost. But yeah, absolutely. I'd say our kind of lessons there are, a lot of these organizations will have, and I'm sure Kath kind of, I can talk to kind of iCare, but they'll have a lot of kind of, innovation funding available, or a decent amount of innovation funding that will kind of run pilots and test concepts. But if you then kind of intend on scaling from that initial pilot or proof of concept up to a broader agreement and kind of widespread adoption, some clinical data or some at least ROI data is going to be critical. You can't just write off the fact that it should work, and and that's we've now run we've got kind of multiple kind of peer-reviewed publications of perks, and at the end of this year we'll hopefully be publishing our randomized control trial with the University of Sydney, which is all about how do we create that not only differentiation from the other 300,000 health apps in the App Store, but also how do we really demonstrate to our business customers the value that delivering perks to their patients delivers to them.
Fabulous. Thank you. And as I said, a hot topic on this is adoption. So I'm going to come back to another question around adoption, and that kind of feeds into what we're talking about at the minute. So someone's asked from the crowd, could you tell us a bit more about your various co-design product development processes quite early on in the process? How did you actually get out and engage with your end users with your MVP, and then integrate that feedback back into your products to keep things evolving? They acknowledge that adoption is a key challenge in healthcare, so they would imagine that co-design is pretty much key to getting things out there. Who'd like to have a go, Kath?
Yeah, I'll give it a crack. Very, very initially, our team include our end users. So that's the very first thing. So the very first user was Clara, co-founder of my sister's son. So very early on, that proof of concept is this, again, is our hypothesis right? And then expanding out and, building up a team that has those connections and relationships in the market, and focusing really narrowly on a particular group. So we're not trying to solve everything, though every time we demo now the products, everyone thinks of new uses that they could do, which is great, which, ties in, I guess, to focus being quite difficult when, you've been working on something for some time and users say, oh, can we use it for this and that? And I always say yes, because I get so excited that there's more needs and more uses for it. So fortunately that, our team always slap me around and say focus. But so yeah, it's just establishing those relationships, as Elizabeth was talking about before, and engaging and being out in the market, and really, as much as and everyone here has services, I can't stress enough the workflow of understanding how people are going to use it, not just, the usability of the actual product, but how are they going to incorporate it into their workflow, and that goes for users and clinicians. It's absolutely critical.
On that topic, how is, and anyone feel free to answer, is there a specific way that you're all measuring your long-term user engagement and incorporating that, I guess, back into your company KPIs?
I'm happy to jump in on this one, but because it is literally our bread and butter. Yeah, it's effectively our product is that we can engage users and particularly high risk, high cost, high value patients in ways that are relatively unprecedented in healthcare. Our kind of standard metric is that 70% of our daily active users, 70% of our monthly active users are daily active users. So they're engaging literally multiple times a day. For us, they're kind of our key KPIs, kind of adherence, engagement, and retention, and how long do those patients stay on a perks program. So they are really critical. I think, particularly if it's coming down to something like chronic disease management, where it literally is our average user is taking 5-6 medications a day. They probably have 3 or 4 other tasks that they need to complete. So for that kind of cohort, really demonstrating that regular engagement and also that kind of long-term adherence and persistence with our programs is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually think developing those metrics, those success metrics relatively early on in your company is really important. We have a couple that we've tracked from the start, and we're continuing to improve what we track. The number of calls per month that a user does, the number of video consultations that a clinician does on CoView is one of those things. As they become more confident with it, they actually increase the number of usages. Also the duration of the calls. Some of them, now that's more profession specific. Some of them actually need shorter consultations. Some of them need longer consultations. Then also the number of users per account. So how many users are they actually, how many of the clinicians in a company are actually picking up telehealth. So those are uptake metrics. And then we get success metrics from the patients that are basically saying whether it was good or not so good. These are the kinds of things that we're currently tracking. We're planning to track a lot more things around impact in rural areas and communities. So I think having these key success metrics is really important.
Fantastic. So there are a few questions around funding as well. And I guess one of the key ones is at what stage did you decide that you were going to go forward for fundraising in your development plan? How early or how late? And what sort of luck have you had with VCs in Australia in terms of getting funding, if anyone has? Elizabeth, do you want to start us off?
Sure. We probably have not had as much or have not gone as far in this journey, I have to say. So we've not got to the stage of raising even seed capital. So everything has been self-funded through the founders, and we've also got philanthropists from Asia who would invest early. So I think that we had deliberately decided initially to, in a way, wait a little bit until we can show some early traction and at least can prove the business model, because I think we've always had that question from the beginning. We want to be able to prove it even to ourselves that, and I think the best way to convince other people to invest money in you is if you have skin in the game too. So if we all put in money and our time and efforts to prove it to ourselves, we find that, through that learning, we can then be clearer about what we're asking later on. And I think that perhaps one of the points that Scott mentioned earlier, being in this digital health, I feel like we're in the middle of this, we're still sort of trying to figure out what will be the type of investors who will be interested and also be the right one for the company. Is this, because it's not quite in the consumer sort of products, it's not like you're not the Uber of the world, but then you're also not really in this sort of strictly medical device and, biotech space. So, and then there's, obviously new groups like impact investors now who are looking at social impact. So it's really trying to figure out where's the right fit. So I think for us, it's still a bit of a journey, and we'll see where we go from here.
Sure.
So we've received venture capital funding. I don't know who else has. Kath, Scott, yeah, as well. Yeah. So
Kath and I actually have the same investor.
Excellent. So we received you know, a venture capital investment as we were spinning out of CSIRO. So we're a bit of a special case, of course, having developed our technology first at CSIRO, having kind of proven our business model first at CSIRO, and then received funding to spin out. But it's still a quite similar story for everyone, I believe, that you kind of have to prove first that your business model will work. And at the beginning, you're more likely to find an angel investor, someone who's private, who's going to put money into you, who believes in you personally more than anything else, and is willing to put something towards the idea that you have. Our angel investor to some extent was CSIRO. So our first external investment was venture capital. And that was brought in when we could show a persistent growth rate month on month. And we basically had a plan, a business plan, how we were going to grow that even bigger. That then came to fruition, obviously, during the pandemic. And since the pandemic, we've had numerous investors knock on our doors because they could see the success. And, you know, once you have success, it's actually much easier to get an investor.
Of course.
But yeah, Kath, I don't know, how was your investment story?
Yeah, I think we're a hardware, I mean, we're actually a data company, but, you know, we have a hardware that facilitates that. So our ability to demonstrate, I guess, the business model works was, you know, is still a little way out for us. So we rightly, the investors in Australia were mostly saying, we'll love it when you move to being a, you know, a SaaS company on the hardware, you know, love the model, all of that, but we needed, you know, a larger scale investment to get the hardware to the scale that we needed at commercial grade. And we were very fortunate to have had some investors along the journey with us that were able to see all the progress we'd made. And so it was that long-term relationship that we'd had, particularly with, as Scott said, with Giant Leap, were with us for a year. With, you know, the iCare grant, they had that visibility for us for a whole year, and we were able to have that confidence in our ability to execute. So there is a balance of, again, relationships and, you know, of people having, as you say, being able to back you. And then we have a VC over in Silicon Valley that they actually manufacture wheelchairs. So they have that knowledge and know what an impact this is going to make. So they have a unique experience and knowledge, as does iCare, in the problem we're solving. And so that's where we've had real, you know, knowledge experts invest in us early on. So being able to find those, and then Giant Leap was unique in that, because they'd had that long visibility of us. So otherwise it would have been very challenging. It still was 2 years in, but.
Scott, did you want to add anything?
I think everything's been covered. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we had a very similar kind of past the cutoff test in terms of our interactions with Giant Leap were awesome. And then where we were at in terms of, I think one of the questions was like, what stage were we at?
Yeah.
We'd probably been going for about 12 months. We'd done a lot of kind of like, I guess, testing of the product and had some kind of early indications as to what the patient outcomes were. And we just signed probably kind of first 2 commercial customers who were going to deliver it to their patients. But we actually hadn't even launched our first commercial program yet. We'd probably had some kind of upfront revenue come in, but that was kind of the stage where we raised. Ultimately, it's kind of a very personal decision as to like, how far you can self-fund till, you need to go find a job in some ways. So, the kind of in terms of the right time or the right phase or the right stage, I think you want some initial traction, some demonstration that the product works and there's a willingness to pay by someone. And then, it comes down to kind of how many milestones do you want to hit before you want to bring in external capital.
Fabulous. Thank you. We're kind of running out of time already. So I might throw a question about the what's next to you all, and maybe you could all have a brief shot at it. But what are some of the left field, novel and bold innovations that you think will disrupt medtech, especially digital health, over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think it's all been accelerated by COVID.
There you go. Exactly right. Has anybody got some idea of the future?
Yeah, I think we will see a fundamental change in the way that we perceive pharmaceuticals and digital health tech, because to some extent we have used just medication in the past to fix up things, and now we can actually use data and behavioral change to fix up things. We can actually prove that it works through the data, which is what I think every one of us kind of does. It's kind of what digital health does. So I think this is a really big development for the future. And data will become our new medication, if I might just put it like that.
Sure. I'd agree. I think the kind of big thing that I think about is as digital health shifts from, I guess, translating the existing care model of, how do we do exactly what we did before, but online or in the cloud or those kind of things, to, okay, if we were redesigning the way we deliver care from the ground up with all the technology that we have now, would we necessarily do it the exact same way? And as with pretty much every industry that's gone through a digital transformation, the answer is no. And so what are the innovations that will fundamentally change the way we think about delivering care and change those care models? In all the kind of, patient-centric, evidence-based kind of ways, but how does taking a digital-first approach change the way that we deliver care across a range of different conditions?
And it transforms, I 100% agree with that, kind of transforming the delivery of care, but also the access to care. And it really forms, I think, even though it's technology, it really enables a better relationship between a clinician and a patient or a client, because you're able to kind of cut through all of that. Well, certainly for us, and I think for most of you, that interrogation part of trying to dig into what's really going on, because you're like, oh, what's happening at 2 p.m. on Tuesday? And so you're able to have more directed conversations and really focus on areas of need. And I think that really, what we've seen, and I'm sure the rest of you, it enhances the relationship.
Sure. Okay, well, thank you. I'm now going to hand over to Duncan McInnes, who is the Director of Stakeholder Engagement for New South Wales and the ACT at MTP Connect. He's just going to take us through some reflections and final thoughts, and we'll come back in a moment.
Thanks, Dharmika, and thanks to the panel for a fantastic range of insights. I think one of the things that really came across in our session today is a message that came across in the May monthly buzz as well, and that's, first of all, solve a problem, but second of all, understand who's going to pay you to solve that problem. We heard a really interesting insight from Kath when she talked about they had a clinical need, but the difficult bit was building the business around that. And I think there's a message that needs to be clear, that clinical need doesn't necessarily equal good business. We heard Scott talk about his clinical need, which was targeting the least engaged patients and the end user being the patient, but really understanding exactly how they were going to get paid and who was going to get paid to solve that need was one of the most important things. From Elizabeth's perspective, we heard a lot of really interesting stuff about varying the business model from a direct-to-consumer to a B2B2C model, not necessarily the same in all countries either. So I think if you're a founder out there trying to understand how to start a business, the most key thing is understanding who's going to pay you. From these 4 founders of relatively mature companies, we heard a really clear description and understanding of what their businesses are, but also what they aren't. And I think that really speaks to the level of thought that's gone into understanding where they fit in. We heard some really interesting stuff around COVID-19. Sylvia talked about how it's going to make things easier from a sales perspective and internationally in terms of building the business. From a telehealth and delivery perspective also, the phrase that we all keep hearing is the genie's out of the bottle now. The other message that I thought was really interesting was this the one that was brought up by many of the panelists about the fact that digital health doesn't easily fit with biotech and pharma, and it doesn't easily fit with tech. And it was a message that came through really strongly in Ant Health's most recent report. They talked about that in terms of both investors, but also maybe in terms of granting bodies not necessarily understanding digital health in quite the same way they do devices and that sort of thing. To finish, I want to sort of go back to Kath's talk about the importance of networks and just really sort of highlight some networks that you can access. First of all, obviously Cicada's network via Dharmaka. It's a great way to meet people. Ant Health, and I know Ant Health is running another course in September, I think, Dharmaka?
Yes, that's correct. We're running a digital health workshop in September, so definitely.
Open to people from New South Wales. And finally, of course, a plug for MTP Connect. If you're looking to make connections, that's one of our reasons for being. So we're more than happy to help you out, put you in contact with clinicians, put you in contact with small companies. That's why we're here. So thanks very much again, Dharmaka, for the opportunity to support this, and congratulations to you and the team on putting on such a great webinar.
Thank you very much, Duncan. That about does it for time, everyone. We're kind of getting towards the end. So I'd like to thank our panelists for their insights and also their time today. I hope it's been insightful for you all. I'd also like to thank again our event partner MTP Connect for their support for another event. And of course, all of you who attended and stuck with us through that, I thank you for joining. While, like Duncan said, there is a workshop coming out in September that we're running with Ant Health and Planet Innovation. So it's a 3-day workshop, and it's designed for digital health companies who have a proof of concept and are seeking practical skills and insights for achieving success or commercial success. So if you're interested, I encourage you to apply via our website. You'll see it up there under events. And if you want to hear about other events and things that we're up to, just sign up to our newsletter on our website as well. So finally, I always ask everyone to please fill out the post-webinar survey. It's really important to us that you can continue to help us improve these events and let us know what you want to hear more of. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming along. Really, really appreciate it. See you later.
Thank you.